Okay, let's start with the Geeta Dhyanam, and it's should be that sheet in the Kirtan book, standing on sheet. O Bhagavad Gita, by which Arjuna was illumined by Lord Krishna himself, and which was composed of 18 chapters within the Mahabharata by the ancient sage Vyasa. O Divine Mother, destroyer of rebirth, who showers the nectar of oneness upon us. O Bhagavad Gita, my affectionate mother, on thee I meditate. All the Upanishads are the cows. The milker is the cowherd boy, Krishna. Arjuna is the calf. People of purified intellect are the drinkers. And the milk is the supreme nectar of the Gita. My salutations to the Lord, who is the source of supreme bliss, whose grace makes the mute eloquent and the crippled cross mountains. Hari Om Tat Sat. So, the seventh discourse, seventh chapter, is the yoga of knowledge and self-realization. And here we had shared this chapter is the beginning of the explanation of that, Tattvamasi. So it starts with Tao and then comes to that. So what's happening is Lord Krishna is explaining his nature. And as we said morning before last, it's actually that absolute that's speaking through Lord Krishna. It's the same absolute that speaks through Jesus the Christ, the same absolute that speaks through the Buddha. And so really it's the highest consciousness explaining here the nature of God, the nature of universe. And so now we continue. There's a beautiful rhythm here that comes in these next shlokas, and we'll read. These come directly from Upanishadic teaching as well. So we'll pick up here. We'll just step back to number 6, just to read in the rhythm. Everything originates out of these two aspects of my prakriti, my nature. I create and dissolve the entire cosmos. So it all happens within me. Apart from me, there is nothing whatsoever. The entire creation is strung on me like a necklace of precious gems. Arjuna, I am the taste in pure water, the radiance in the sun and the moon. In all scriptures, the sacred word Om, the sound in the silence, and the virility in men. I am the fragrance of the earth, the brilliance in fire, the life in all beings, and the purifying force in austerity. Know me, Arjuna, forever present as the origin of all beings. I am intelligence in those who are wise, and splendor in all that is beautiful. I am the power in strength that is untainted by passion or personal desire. In fact, I am the desire in all beings, Arjuna, when desire is in accord with Dharma. The qualities of nature, the gunas, come out of me. They are my manifestations, yet I am not contained in them. Most people fail to look beyond the three qualities of my prakriti, my nature. People see only these changing qualities and don't see me, the transcendent one. In the midst of all that changes, I am what doesn't change. No doubt it is hard to see through this, my divine illusion composed of the gunas, but those who take refuge in me absolutely pass over this illusion. Others, still deluded by Maya, lose their discrimination and sink to their lower nature. Thus they do evil things, feel no devotion to me, and don't seek refuge in me. Good people worship me, Arjuna, for 4 basic reasons: to be relieved of suffering, to understand life, to rise from poverty to wealth, and just because they are wise already. Of these 4, the wise excel because their devotion is steady. They love me more than anything else, and they are my beloved. All sincere spiritual seekers are certainly blessed with noble souls. Among them, however, those who know the truth and with a steady mind set me as their highest goal, soon identify with me, and I regard them as my very self. After many lifetimes, a person grows wise and takes refuge in me and nothing else. Then he or she realizes that I am all that is. Such a great soul is rare indeed. Others still allow personal desires to lead astray their good judgment. Thus, they follow their lower nature and worship lesser gods for their blessings. Devotees may select any name or form as the object of their worship. But if they have sincere belief, Shraddha, I make their faith strong and steady. When they worship with steady faith, the form they have chosen, they get what they want. But actually, I am the one fulfilling their desires.
So, Swamiji?
Let's continue, and then we come to the question. Okay? I know you won't lose it. However, those of limited understanding obtain limited satisfaction. Those who worship the gods go to the gods. My devotees come to me. Because their understanding is still shallow, many still believe that I, the unmanifested one, am limited to one particular manifestation. They have not yet seen my true nature, which is unchanging and supreme. Not everyone can see me as I truly am because I veil myself in Maya. Thus deluded, the world does not recognize me as the one who was never born and never changes. Arjuna, I know all about every creature in the past, present, and even the future, yet no one knows all about me. People are deluded by attraction and aversion, which spawn all the pairs of opposites. These dualities, Arjuna, subject all to Maya at birth. But people who do good free themselves from doing bad, and thus rise above the delusion of these dualities. In this way, their worship of me becomes very steady. Whoever takes refuge in me, even as they are striving to escape the condition of old age and death, will know Brahman, Atman, and Karma. Those who see me pervading all the elements of nature, who realize me as the object of all worship, and who understand that I am the essence of self-sacrifice, will be conscious of my presence continually, even at the time of bodily death. Hariom Tat Sat. We wanted to get the flow of it. And I hope you were able to come back to the flow instead of being stuck on the question. We wanted to get the flow of it. And now we'll come down and break it down. Now we'll come back and break it down. But that, you see, that entire discourse is spoken in a chariot. Right here, this chariot. And it's not spoken with commentary. We come back to the commentary, we come back to the discussion of it. But this chapter is spoken in 5 minutes. This entire chapter, and it goes together, you see. This is a good one to read like this, to come back to and read like this. Because really it speaks to the both to that highest truth, which some here seek, and most get stuck in their perception of what is, and hold that. And both of these are spoken to in this chapter, right? Okay, you had a question, and then we'll come back and do a little bit shloka by shloka. What's the question, dear?
Yeah, about he names 4 categories of worship. And I'm wondering...
Yeah, we're going to talk about that one this morning. So yes, please. You're wondering...
What about someone who worships for higher knowledge, for spiritual knowledge? Would that be the 4 categories wise already, or would be the 3rd category worshipping for knowledge of the world, worldly knowledge?
Yeah. There's a beautiful commentary from Swami Venkatesananda, and we'll discuss exactly that.
Okay.
So that's a perfect lead-in, Hari. Thank you. Jai. Jai. Okay. So let's do that. We'll break it down a little bit. We come back to we'll just read. I am the sapidity in water, I am the light in the moon and the sun, I am the syllable Om in all the Vedas, sound in ether and virility in men. I am sweet fragrance in earth and the brilliance in fire, the life in all beings. I am the austerity of the ascetics. This beginning of this dialogue, this beginning of this teaching from Lord Krishna, and it's not really a dialogue at this point, is it? He's just saying. And Arjuna, you can imagine, it's the same as what we see here. Arjuna is listening to him so deeply at this point. And hearing and present for him. And of course, really, the Lord is everything. But what he's describing is how we can see him, how we can catch him. And I already said there's nothing that isn't me or my nature. So, and then continuing, so know me, O Arjuna. And this is what we were just describing. He's saying, know me as. So first, we have to learn to relate to the highest before we can see that highest pervading all. So know me as. So here he's actually saying how to know me. How to know me. Oh. Know me as the eternal seed of all beings. So, we do this, and we can do this for fun again this morning. So here, our Christmas tree. Jai. Hare Christmas. Christmas. So our Christmas tree, if we can see for a moment, some of us that have been together here for a couple of years or so, we know this, so we will pull it out now and then. But the Christmas tree comes from a seed. When we talk about this mind that we're working with, we come to see that the mind is not the beholder of all knowledge. In particular, this limited mind that we're working with, which is stuck in very limited notions and ideas. And so we have to work to pry it open, to expand it. But the way it seems to work is it's always going out. And what that means is it goes out through the sense objects and it collects an object and it brings it back in and analyzes that object. But it's analyzing it in a very limited way. So it's always going out, which means in time, it's always going into the future. So it's always looking forward and always looking out. It seems that way. You have to train it to do something else. So it's a very odd thing, really. This tree, so if you imagine it to be a tree with seeds, then this tree came from a seed, but also this tree will give birth to more trees. Correct? What's the difference between this tree and the seed that it came from?
One is manifest, the other is unmanifest.
There's no difference. That's what you said also. There's no difference. Just time is the only difference.
Yeah.
Right? It's essentially identical. The seed and the tree are essentially identical. And then the seeds that come from this, what's the difference between the tree and the seeds that come from it? It's essentially identical. They're the same. Again, it appears to be different because it plays out over time. Right? So with that little kernel of knowledge, now go backwards instead of going forwards. Because if you go out, you'll see an unimaginable number of trees at some point in the future. But if you stop and consider it for a moment, you see, but actually, they're all this tree. Right? Just played out over time. So go backwards. And now consider, reflect upon the seed from which this tree came and the tree from which that seed and this tree came. Right? And now keep going back. So there are countless of these from the prior trees. But how many trees were there at the beginning?
None.
One.
The intelligence to make the seed, I suppose.
And you're jumping ahead. You're jumping ahead. Enjoy the process. Allow yourself to engage in the process. So this tree is evidence of a prior tree and is not different from a prior tree, correct? So if you go all the way back, you get to one tree. And then if you go back further, you get to know me, O Arjuna, as the eternal seed of all beings. So this is where this mind looking out won't catch it. But if you corral it and start to bring it back in, then you can catch what's being shared. Right? So all of this came from one seed. It's undeniable. I mean, you can deny it, but that would have to be false. Wisdom says it came from one. In the same way that the scientists, the physicists look at all of this and say this is all an effect of one truth. One seed. It's the same. And here he says, I am that seed. Know me as the seed, the eternal seed. And by the way, therefore, what's the difference between Krishna, that seed, and this?
No.
None.
Swamiji,
Om.
this is Vedanta, right?
It's not, I wouldn't call it anything. It's just a way of relating to what Lord Krishna is sharing here, which is you could say Vedanta, but he's just saying, I am the eternal seed of all beings. So it doesn't make any difference what tradition.
The question in Vedanta is who who am I?
Who am I?
Going
Yeah.
backwards until you come to this.
Yeah. That's indeed. And that's called Vedanta. Yeah. But, who am I? But here it's a way of relating to what he's sharing. By the way, Jesus says the same thing. Jesus says, but it's also the Absolute speaking through Jesus. He says, you can do nothing without me. I and the Father are one. Right? So, again, same. Okay, continuing. And we get to your question here in a moment. As eternal, know me, O Arjuna, as the eternal seed of all beings. And can you see how to practice that? Why do you really have to keep forgetting? This is what he's speaking of, by the way, but there is an answer for the question I asked. But it's a good question for us to ask ourselves. Why do I have to keep forgetting this? Why is it that when someone says boo, I have to forget this?
I was thinking this morning, going over what you had talked about, and the separation of anger, and from the gross to the subtle, and to recognize that by anything that separates me from people, place, and things in the Lord. Would that be accurate?
Let's continue.
Okay.
Yeah, I hear you. Yes, it's related. Yeah, it's related. Know me, O Arjuna, as the eternal seed of all beings. I am the intelligence of the intelligent. So what does that mean? I'm smart. Where does my smartness come from?
The seed.
He says, I am the intelligence of the intelligent. So if we want a way to relate, and again, he starts it by saying, know me as. Know me as. So this is the way to find God in day-to-day life. Know me as the intelligence and the intelligent. The splendor of the splendid am I. So the most beautiful of the beauties. Of the strong, I am the strength, devoid of desire and attachment. In all beings, I am desire, unopposed to Dharma, O Arjuna. So, okay. Whatever beings are pure, active, and inert, know that they proceed from me. They're in me, yet I am not in them. He's just introduced the gunas. So later, long discussion of gunas, detailed discussion of gunas, the nature of nature. But here, pure, sattva, active, rajas, inert, tamas. Whatever beings are, so all of the beings, know that they proceed from me. They are in me, yet I am not in them. And it's a concept we'll talk about for a moment as well. Deluded by these natures, composed of the three qualities of nature, all this world does not know me as distinct from them and immutable. So immutable, unchangeable. Unaffected by what happens here. Unaffected. We'll come back to the concept. Verily, this divine illusion of mind made up of the three qualities of nature is difficult to cross over. Those who take refuge in me alone cross over this delusion. The evildoers, the deluded, and the lowest of men do not seek me. They whose knowledge is destroyed by illusion follow the ways of demons. Just one comment on this. So we hear that this human birth is a mixed birth. What does that mean? That means you have within you both the asuric nature and the divine nature. They're both within. They're both accessible within. Does that make sense? Yeah. So there is within you a materialistic voice. That you put this up and it will say that's a hand, it's only a hand. And it won't want to go any further. But there's also within you this recognition of the divinity, the divine seeing itself. So both of these are within everyone. That's what mixed birth means, or mixed karma means this as well. Mixed birth. So both. So based upon our choices, we have the ability to not see or to see. Does that make sense? Om. Okay, and now your question. We can read this commentary. 4 kinds of virtuous men worship me, O Arjuna. They are the distressed, the seeker of knowledge, the seeker of wealth, and the wise. Of the wise, ever steadfast and devoted to the one excels, for I am exceedingly dear to the wise, and he is dear to me. So here's the commentary Swamiji adds. He says, to pray and to worship God motivelessly, without motive, is of course good. Some people feel, and this is your question from a few days ago, Yashoda, still a discussion, still you can hear some commentary about it. So to pray and to worship God without motive is of course good. Some people feel that it is a sign of depravity to pray for selfish ends and material advantages. Here Krishna disagrees. They who worship him for these are surely virtuous men, not necessarily wise. The poor man who prays to God for wealth is surely nobler and more virtuous than the thief or dacoit. You catch why? Okay. The sick man who prays for relief is better than the drug addict. In fact, one of the purposes of poverty and sickness is to turn man to God. Unconsciously, the poor and sick recognize this if they are virtuous, and that recognition of awareness comes by God's grace. A hot pan will burn your finger, whether you touch it knowingly or unknowingly. Even so, the fire of God's power will devour desire and ignorance, whether you touch it deliberately or accidentally. Thus, prayer is good, whatever the motive, because then you're thinking of God, you're bringing the light into your life. And you're recognizing the higher power.
Whenever we heard it ourselves, we're like, oh, Jesus.
Yeah. Oh. Yeah. No, it's good. It's helpful. Virtuous, yes. Oh, much better that way. When the prayer contact is made, the Lord's love burns to ashes all earthly desires and frees us from all selfishness and egoism. However, this does not minimize the glory of unselfish love of God for his own sake. By the way, I'll just share just an example from pilgrimage of this. I've shared before the last day that I had walked, that I met this man who's an absolute saint, so pure and loving and kind, unimaginably so, not worldly in any way. He had been homeless for 17 years. When he lost his home, he was so angry with God and everyone else, but angry with God. And so his anger towards God led him to continue to think of God. And eventually, he came out of it washed clean. So it's a good example of what's being shared here. So if you're going to be angry, yes, better to be angry at God than some other person.
There's a relationship.
Oh. So he continues, he says, however, this does not minimize the glory of unselfish love of God for his own sake. The wise man Jnani who loves God motivelessly is supreme. He knows the appearance as appearance, and therefore he knows the reality of the appearance. He's fully aware that the diverse world phenomenon are purely manifestations of God's divine nature. Hence, he knows that he loves God because he cannot help doing so, since God is the very soul of his soul. He knows, too, that this eternal unity or oneness is expressed in him as irrepressible love. He is the pure iron needle, God is the magnet. In his case, the devotion and surrender are natural. He rests in God in unbroken, eternal communion. Hari, your question is actually in the answer to your question is actually in the shloka. So the seeker of knowledge. That's what you were asking about.
Yeah, because in the other translation it says seeker of knowledge of the world.
Yeah. So Swamiji takes a little liberty sometimes. This is a little bit more classical translation. So it's all inclusive of both.
Oh, I see. Okay.
It's all inclusive of both, actually. The traditional, the typical as it would be any knowledge. But since it's any knowledge, it's the same.
Yeah.
And it will naturally lead into that. You see. Because if you're praying for knowledge in a worldly way, then and receiving guidance, then that who you're praying to will keep leading you up. And at some point you'll be seeking knowledge of capital S self, knowledge of this knowledge. Oh. Okay. Any other questions or comments? We'll take just another moment on one of the other concepts. Yes, dear,
I
please.
just want to comment on that what we just was mentioned that
Yeah.
makes sense in my own experience. I was always asking about what is my purpose in life, thinking like I will ask to something higher. I don't know what I used to believe, and I always thought in my limited perception was what career I was meant to be.
Yeah.
And then slowly and surely I arrived to it now. I was led to remember who I was in this path.
Yeah. That's the discussion here. It is, and we were having this discussion yesterday evening, Gopala. The asuric nature, the lower nature, has a voice inside of us. And it will say pretty much constantly that you're alone and you have to work this out yourself. And so most of us, left with this question of what to do, will try to sort it out ourselves. And just think about it and then try it and live it and then think about it. And of course, even that will bring us out. Since there is this one truth, and since this one truth is love, then even that will bring us out at some point. But you see, we get stuck with ourselves, very deeply stuck with ourselves at that point. Peace Pilgrim, this beautiful guidance about this question about what to do with my life. Her guidance, ask the question and then bring receptive silence. So listen. Be receptive, be open. And that process is connecting you to the divine, isn't it? Yeah. And in so doing, you get led instead of trying to figure it all out yourself, yes?
Yes.
Yeah. So it's a beautiful ladder then.
And what's the process?
Asking.
God.
So it comes back to the question, actually, if you're praying to God for anything, yes, it's beneficial. And it's just shared, and it was shared in the second part of the commentary. Having said that, yes, indeed, to have this communion, not to ask for something, but to express gratitude, or simply to have the communion, knowing who is here and knowing where. that this would be the highest form of prayer. It's called in the Christian tradition prayer unceasing. But also Swamiji has shared that this lower form of prayer, the fact that we're praying, that process leads us. And I mentioned that saint that I had met for this reason as well. He saw God as the one who did it to him. And that very fact led to his salvation. He wasn't blaming it on everyone else. He was blaming it on God. Oh.
What about anger toward your own ego self?
That's understandable. So it's completely understandable. Yeah. Anger isn't necessarily profitable, but we can certainly understand how we get into that situation. Recognizing that we're wrong is profitable. Recognizing that there's a force within us that's motivating us towards thoughts and words and actions that are not profitable is profitable. In other words, recognizing that there's a force within us that is ignorant, or that is ignorance, that is leading us to act in ways that are not beneficial to ourselves and not beneficial to others. It's very helpful to do. Sometimes some anger will come from that. And that anger sometimes is a fire that will help to burn. Having said that, it's not beneficial to remain angry with oneself. When you see a little bit more, you see, this is just the habitual way. This is and in fact, love is still underlying it. Even the ignorance, love is still underlying it. In other words, when we act in a defensive way, it's still being motivated by love, but being perverted by ignorance. So ignorance is I take myself to be this body, but love is this preservation which is coming from the purity of love. So seeing that, you can cultivate what we call self-love, being acceptance, meaning acceptance, but also not following that impulsive nature. Right? I used to say in pilgrimage, I hear you, but I cannot follow you any longer. I acknowledge you, I love you, but I will not follow you. Which seems to be a very healthy relationship for a sadhaka. That certainly can come, and certainly to intentionally bring it, to see the force within that is urging you towards behavior that won't be beneficial, and to resolve not to follow it, and to recognize the light within, and to resolve to follow it. That's sadhana. That's sadhana. Beautiful question.
The experience that I had with the self-hate and the self-deprecation, I can't do anything right, I'm so bad, I'm so terrible, I'm so awful. Eventually, when one carries that through all the way to its bitter end, it's just complete and total powerlessness. There's a sense that I cannot do anything right, or there's this powerlessness which will lead to seeking a source of power outside of oneself.
Mm-hmm.
Which will finally lead to seeking the power within oneself.
Exactly.
Yeah. So that's by the way, that's the natural evolutionary process. But to the extent you can shortcut that, that's wisdom.
But even going on that journey will lead one back to God.
Every path will eventually lead you there. That's the thing. Because there's no satisfaction otherwise.
Yeah. I mean, if you feel like you know the options.
No, it's true. It's true. It's a beautiful observation you showed it. Yeah, it does. It does. So that is the evolutionary process. And Master Satchidananda will say yoga is the intensification of that evolutionary process. So it's bringing it forward, which also brings some of the pain forward. But it brings an intention to life. And it helps us to sit down and imbibe in this.
Yeah.
Okay, we should close with final prayers in RT, page 174. So knowing that, by the way, Yashoda, you can actually know, we're in so many situations where, what can we do? Because someone's suffering terribly, and you might know a little bit of something, and you want to be able to share, they won't listen. Knowing what you've just shared, you actually know that everyone is on their path.
Yeah.
That's helpful to recognize that. It's helpful to recognize that everyone's on their path. Everyone's on their path. Everyone's covered. So having said that, now the question is, can I be of assistance in some way? Yeah, prayer will always help. Yes, uplifting into the light will always help. Yes, beneficial thoughts and beneficial words will always help. Having compassion will always help. Recognizing, I get this. Right? So having compassion, allowing yourself to be loving even though this person is very disturbed. So that will always help. Okay, 174. Om Trayambakam Yajamahe Sugandhim Pushtivardhanam Orvai Rukameva Bandhanam Mrityoi Mukshiyamamritat Om Trayambakam Yajamahe Sugandhim Pushtivardhanam Orvai Rukameva Bandhanam Mrityoi Mukshiyamamritat Om Trayambakam Yajamahe Sugandhim Pushtivardhanam Orvai Rukameva Bandhanam Mrityoi Mukshiyamamritat Om Sarvesham Swastir Bhavatu Sarvesham Shantir Bhavatu Sarvesham Purnam Bhavatu Sarvesham Mangalam Bhavatu Sarve Bhavantu Sukhinaha Sarve Shantu Niramaya Sarve Bhadrani Pashyantu Makashit Prabhat Bhave Asato Ma Satkamaya Tamaso Ma Jyotirgamaya Mrityor Ma Mritangamaya Om Purnamada Purnamidam Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnameva Vasishate Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. O adorable Lord of mercy and love, salutations and prostrations unto thee. Thou art omnipresent, omnipotent, and omniscient. Thou art Satchidananda. Thou art existence, knowledge, and bliss absolute. Thou art the indweller of all beings. Grant us an understanding heart, equal vision, balanced mind, faith, devotion, and wisdom. Grant us inner spiritual strength to resist temptation and to control the mind. Free us from egoism, lust, anger, greed, hatred, and jealousy. Fill our hearts with divine virtues. Let us behold thee in all these names and forms. Let us serve thee in all these names and forms. Let us ever remember thee. Let us ever sing thy glories. Let thy name be ever on our lips. Let us abide in thee forever and ever. Nambo Sakguru Shivananda Geeta. And for all the saints and sages of all the traditions.
Jai.
That's right. For our team.